he is a superstar in the making. It was like Arsenal were playing with 12. I don't mean the referee. I mean there was two Declan Rices out there.
Arsenal came from behind to beat bitter rivals Tottenham Hotspur 2-1 in the North London derby at the Emirates Stadium on Wednesday night, thrusting themselves well and truly back into the title race and leaving Tottenham floundering in the bottom half of the table behind West Ham on point. Dino, tough show for you this morning, and as always though, you've got your professional hat on and you've got 5 tactical points that fans may or may not have noticed from the game on Wednesday.
Yeah, I can be objective as I was in the preview show. Thanks for all the comments from the Spurs fans in the preview show. Let's hope the Arsenal ones are as positive in this one. But look, Arsenal were miles better. Myles, Lewis, Skelly had a cat and mouse game with both Kulusevski and Johnson. We'll look at that. Box to box masterclass from Declan Rice, superb performance. And then how Arteta punctured Ange ball, and the way we talked about the wheels before in the preview show, how Arsenal dealt with that. And again, Arteta's impressive press. There was a difference in this game that we noticed. We'll go through that. And then there was some more, obviously, set-piece hijinks with Arsenal playing and the set-piece coach being on the edge of the dugout as usual.
Yeah, Nicolas Hover. He always seems to be the first one Arteta hugs. Even at the final whistle, he was getting involved. Yeah. Look, Dino, we'll get into the weeds in a little while. You are a Tottenham Hotspur fan, of course. Before we get into it, just generally, what did you think of the game? Ange went for his players afterwards, obviously bemoaning the dodgy decision to give Arsenal the corner that they scored from, but performance-wise, he wasn't happy.
No, and he was right not to be happy. They were very passive, was the word he used. They weren't greatly aggressive. I think there was a change in tactics from Spurs, which meant they defended very deep on the edge of their box. We'll look at a couple of those bits in a minute. But then when they had the opportunity to really go at Arsenal, they didn't really go for it. They were sort of stuck in between a little bit. But Arsenal dominated the game, dominated possession. As we've gone through before on tactics, that doesn't always mean you get the result, but Arsenal had enough about them to get across the line, and so the outstanding performances in the game were mainly from Arsenal players.
Absolutely. Well, look, the Arsenal fans who'll be watching this show in ravenous fashion, no doubt, desperate to hoover up any content having beaten Tottenham, which they will love. Myles, Lewis, Skelly, the scenes of him walking off after the game, getting a load of grief.
It was Jack Wilshere-like from when Jack Wilshere did it in the North London derby once, and it was a bit like Aaron Ramsey as well when he did it in the North London derby. So Lewis Skelly with his finger to his lips and everything like that was great from an Arsenal perspective. He had every right to wind the Spurs fans up with his performance. He deserved it. I did think it was a little risky doing it in the 83rd minute with the score at 2-1, but that was a bit of wishful thinking from me at the time. Yeah. But his performance was absolutely outstanding. One thing we should point out as well, he is a midfield player, and so I'm not buying into this Arsenal injury thing at the back, because Zinchenko could have played as a more natural left back. Arteta has made the decision to play Lewis Skelly there for a few reasons, and it was the right decision. He had a big job on his hands. Tottenham's best player this season has been Dejan Kulusevski, and he had to do a job on Kulusevski, and they had a tactical plan to do it. And it was a game of cat and mouse, as I've used in the title, which is what Arsenal decided they would do, is that they would make Kulusevski mark Lewis Skelly, not the other way around. You would think that, it's got to be him going the other way. And there were moments, obviously, where he's got to defend as a left-back, and he got very, very tight to Kulusevski, which can be dangerous with Kulusevski because he can roll you. But Declan Rice said after the game that he compared Lewis Skelly to Moussa Dembele, so it was sort of rubbing Spurs' nose in the fact that the star player also was like an ex-Tottenham player. But that means because of his physicality and how strong he is, sort of his low centre of gravity, and that he doesn't get spun. He's so 18 years old. It was a fabulous performance. So that was the physicality side of it. But the tactical side of it is Lewis Skelly didn't totally invert. It was like almost a halfway house. If he totally inverts, then somebody like Pape Sarr or Lucas Bergvall is then going to pick him up, which leaves Kulusevski in the first half and Brennan Johnson in the second half, all that space out wide. But he sort of picked up this mid-position, in between the touchline. Do you remember we did the Chelsea show before where we talked about Cucurella against Saka?
of course,
that inside left channel that he picked up. And he did that so that Kulusevski couldn't leave him there.
Yeah.
Because it was a bit like, I've got to get back.
Yeah.
But then it's sort of like, well, if I pick him up entirely, I'm not pressing, and Spurs press. So Arteta's worked that out, that Spurs will press high, they'll press hard, but if Lewis Skelly picked up this inside position, and then we'll show that Lewis Skelly, the ball carrying distance was remarkable.
Yep.
He carried the ball, and we'll get on to Declan Rice in a minute, but he carried the ball even further in the game than Declan Rice did, because what he was doing was finding that mid position, picking the ball up from Gabriel Saliba and the goalkeeper, and finding this 40-yard space in front of him, because Kulusevski was caught in this mid position that he didn't want to be in. So Lewis Skelly won the game of cat and mouse. He was brilliant defensively, brilliant going forwards, and it was Arteta's decision to play a midfield player as a fullback and use him like an extra midfield player that was really key.
Yeah, it's basically, Arteta hadn't inverted him far enough away so Kulusevski could pass him on to a Tottenham midfielder to sort out, but also he's close enough so he could still get back and defend when he had to. But ultimately, like you say, of the two there, Arsenal definitely had the upper hand because Kulusevski was pretty non-existent, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it was one of the reasons that at half-time Ange made the substitutions. I mean, the other reason was obviously that Yves Bissouma was shocking, absolutely terrible, and he was probably one of the ones that was being targeted by Ange's comments afterwards. And Pat Sarr got a booking for the silly kick of the ball away. The Declan Rice kicked the ball away, by the way. So the referee was at least consistent there for a change. And Sarr was booked, so it was wise that Sarr came off. But when Ange went all guns, Ange ball second half, then Lewis Skelly and Arsenal have got a decision to make. How do we go about it? And in tandem with Declan Rice, they sort of took away that threat on that side by being brave with their positioning. It's not just about being brave on the ball, and he was carrying the ball, but it's also being brave in your position. I'm going to go into that position in the knowledge that I've probably got Brendan Johnson, who's quick, the outside of me, and I'm going to get Kulusevski coming up the inside of me, but from that position I can go both ways. And 18 years old, England will be all over him this month. Thomas Tuchel watching. For me, he is streets ahead of Rico Lewis in a utility fullback / midfield role. He is a superstar in the making, and unfortunately, as the Tottenham hat back on, he was wearing red.
Yeah, Arsenal fans, I mean, he's done himself huge favours with the Gunners fans already this season. Like you say, Zinchenko and Tierney, obviously both available for the game.
And more like left-backs. Zinchenko was bought as a utility sort of player like that, but correctly, Arteta has decided that it's a midfield brain that he needs in that position. And also, players like that, in the midfield players, when they've brought up playing in midfield, are so happy going both ways because they have to be. Whereas a more natural
You're playing
left-back,
a 360 game.
Exactly.
Right?
Whereas a left-back would want to drift to that side. And what he didn't want is drifting to that side and then a Tottenham underlap coming that we talked about in the previous
It's much easier, isn't it, to go from playing a 360 game to go out wide and play a 180-degree game than it is the other way around.
Precisely.
Right, talking of 360-degree specialists, central midfield maestros, Declan Rice, you said to me before we came on, that was a classic old-school Declan Rice at West Ham performance. I've seen those time and time again at London Stadium, Declan Rice in a claret and blue shirt. He's one of those players, I've always said this, that you only fully appreciate how good Declan Rice is when you watch him in the flesh and for 90 minutes. He's a 90-minute player, rarely gets on the highlight reel. Last night, he proved why he's one of the best players in that position in the world.
Sensational. It was a sensational performance, and it was mentioned on the commentary. The people that friends in the ground in both home and away end, and it was.
You got some Arsenal friends in.
Yeah, and they were quite, they were quite level-headed last night, which I was impressed with. But they were, puffing out their cheeks at how good Declan Rice was, and puffing out cheeks is the right way, because he was everywhere. We'll show his heat map and his touch map. He was absolutely everywhere, and he was making challenges in his own area, making clearances. He was there to help Lewis Skelly, because experienced player knowing you've got a young left back playing there, and it's his side, his inside left side. And then all of a sudden he was popping up in the penalty area at the other end to force those Tottenham midfielders back into the area. And look, it was like Arsenal were playing with 12. And I don't mean the referee. I mean there was two Declan Rices out there, which is he was brilliant. And it's not just his energy and the amount of grass he covers, which is clear. It's his intelligence, his game intelligence to do that. So Spurs were doing a really good job, actually, early on in defending the edge of the area. Yep. And what they did, and we'll show a grab of this.
It was more Myles ball than Ange ball, wasn't it?
But it was a really good plan. And for all the domination that Arsenal had on the ball in the first 15 or 20 minutes, Kinski didn't make a save. There was the set pieces, which Spurs know they're going to have to deal with. But what Spurs did is they dropped right onto the penalty area line, which means then when you get Odegaard coming on his left foot to do that in-swinging cross, and then you get Lewis Skelly or somebody on the other side do the same, it means the ball drops in. And it gives them the time when the ball's in the air to retreat back to make it headed clearance. And Archie Gray, another 18-year-old who was excellent, and Dragozin did a pretty good job early on of that until Declan Rice worked it out. Yeah. And so then Declan Rice starts to run from deeper and run into the area there. And then he's given Papsar, Pedro Porro an absolute nightmare. There was a wonderful touch where he knocked the ball back inside to Trossard, I think. And he gave Tottenham this problem that was then in their mind. Like, we're defending the edge of the box, but then Rice is running through here. And then Tottenham counter-attack, and it's Rice winning the ball back the other end. So it was fabulous. And also, as we move on to point 3 with Rice, it was how they counterbalanced that Tottenham attack in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a truly maestro performance from Declan, and he's got several years ahead of him playing at the very top of his game. Ange ball, has it been punctured? 3 games on the spin for Tottenham. Dino, the great win against Liverpool, made tough work of it against Tamworth, but came through in the end, and then lost out on this one. Out of those 3 games, 2 wins or 2 victories overall, I suppose, and a defeat, you would say that's a reasonable return. But will Ange have wanted to lose this one? And performance-wise, are Tottenham fans full of positivity, or are they a little bit concerned?
I think we can remove this thing about him only having one way to play now. That can go.
The first half proved that,
absolutely.
Didn't it?
And obviously they would have been very disappointed not to go in at half-time level because, there was the corner incident, and then there was, the goalkeeper, I think, we discussed him before we came on, that the goalkeeper could have done better, but it was a great strike from Trossard. So if those tactics had worked until half-time, and then they get to the 50 or 60th minute level in the game, and then they can make the Maddison-Johnson change and then go for it a bit more, perhaps it would go. But the problem is with Ange ball now is, as I talked about in the preview show, it is a rigid structure. Yeah. It's fabulous to watch, but it is a rigid structure. So you can plan for it. Doesn't mean you can stop it all the time, but you can have a plan for it. And Arsenal's plan for it was great because in the first half, they worked out, OK, they're going to sit here. So then we can abandon all that video meeting before where we talked about the wheels and whatever. But then half-time happens.
We'll forget all that we learned in Tactics Exposed.
Yeah, for the first half
in
only.
the build-up.
But for the second half, then they can go and look at it and say, OK, right, they've made their change. They've brought on Maddison. They've brought on Johnson. Sarr and Basuma have gone off, which meant Bergval's going to be the only sitting midfield player. And then they've gone to their 2, 3 men either side. Another 18-year-old who was excellent as well. Makes us feel old, doesn't it? And then, so you've got, on your left-hand side, then you've ended up with Maddison, Son and Jed Spence. And on the right-hand side, you've got Pedro Porro, Brennan Johnson and Kulusevski. And what Rice did and what Odegaard did is come into that position to be the inside right and left players to help their fullbacks so that when Tottenham rotate, then they've got somebody to track back. And also Trossard did a very good job as well.
Yeah, so like the when you spoke with those wheels of chaos that Ange does that we spoke about last week, that enables Tottenham basically, doesn't it? Often a deeper player, the fullback, to do that underlapping or overlapping run at times.
Or the midfield player, or one of the 8s, whatever position they're in, and the ball will go wide to the winger, it will go inside to either the fullback or the 8, and then either the fullback or the 8 will then overlap, and they interchange like that. And if you don't track the runner, you're in big trouble.
So who did you see then? Rice and Odegaard you mentioned there. Were they tracking the runners, or were they passing the man on, which you spoke about?
There was what it enabled with those two tracking was the fullbacks not to just go out to the winger. Yeah. So if you track the runner and you stay with the man, and I know Sterling didn't have the greatest game going forward and he didn't have the pace to go up the outside of Jed Spence, but he did a very good job defensively for Arsenal. We'll come on to the press in a minute. But they track the runners back, which means then Tottenham have got to do it first time. It all becomes a little bit more rushed and pressurised. And it was only maybe 2 or 3 times that they worked it out. But Odegaard did as much good defensive work as he did attacking work, which is not always the case. He's a very good presser of the ball.
He's the trigger of the press.
Absolutely. But last night you could see that in this game he was tracking runners right back. And you have to against Spurs, otherwise they will sort of overwhelm you. But what then happened was, because Arsenal had worked out this tactic out wide, it then meant they could spring the counter-attack going the other way with Bergvall as the only man in midfield. And that's where Lewis Skelly and Rice's ball carrying one side and Timber and Odegaard's ball carrying the other side brings the whole game back up the field again, and Spurs are penned in with the goalkeeper flicking the ball around. So it was a very good plan. They'd watched Spurs a lot, clearly, of what was happening, and they were very clear in their minds how they were going to stop it.
Yeah, it sounds like they were able to sort of flex within game now, which is also very impressive and a key sort of tool in the armour of any
I spotted
team.
at half-time, as Tottenham make the change, 2 of the Arsenal coaches are on the touchline. Yeah. Obviously making sure, lads, look, the substitution's been made. Yeah. This is now what we've planned for, This is back to Ange ball rather than, the defensive mode of the first half.
Back to Tactics Exposed, which we watched at the training ground.
Yeah, well, let's hope so.
Right, number 4, Dino, Mikel Arteta's impressive press. Talk to me, praise Arsenal.
And it was impressive because it was different, OK? So this is... We've spoken before about how out of possession Arsenal sort of operate like a 4-4-2. Yeah, they drop into a 4-4-2. We've shown that on the formation
1995
before.
All over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Saka's available, it was Saka who drops onto the right of midfield. And then if it's Martinelli or Trossard drop on the left, the 2 centre midfield players play there. And Odegaard and Havertz are the 2 up that do the press. Okay? In this game, it was different and it confused Spurs a little bit early. And it also, in the second half, meant that Spurs weren't quite sure who was going to who and where they were playing the ball around, because what they did was they pressed as a 4-3-3 instead, and Trossard did a really good job of tracking Porro back into that inverted position, and then he's got Rice and Partey as a 3. Partey moves across to the right of the 3 and Rice goes into the middle. Well, Rice was everywhere. Yeah. But Sterling then goes and becomes the 3rd man pressing. So it was Sterling, Odegaard and Havertz being a 3-man press, which stopped Spurs sort of playing first-time balls out. Yeah. And that's where Spurs are really dangerous. Where Ange ball is most effective is when a centre-back hits a first-time ball to a full-back. And Arteta stopped it by having 3 men there instead of only 2. And it sounds simple. It sounds something that you shouldn't have to drill into players or whatever, but it isn't simple. You're playing high-pressure Premier League football against high-quality players, and it was just a very subtle tweak to their press tactic, and it was a key part of Spurs not getting out.
Right, set-piece hijinks, Dino, at both ends. It's impossible, actually, not to talk about Arsenal without talking about set-pieces. Nicolas Hover, as we've already mentioned, the set-piece coach, is an integral part of Mikel Arteta's backroom staff. Have you got anything new to add that you noticed from the game on set pieces?
Yeah, very much so.
Or is it same old Stoke City Arsenal?
No. And look, let's remember, before the Arsenal fans all jump on the comments again and whatever, let's remember how positive we were in that corner episode about Arsenal. That was not criticism, OK? I know as much as the Arsenal fans...
I think, but perhaps not you, but I think Sun Football on our social media platforms did mock up Mikel Arteta in his Tony Pulis hat and Stoke City coat.
Fair enough, but they played into it and Arteta also said that he doesn't mind it at all because they keep scoring from it. Yeah. And why would you mind it as they keep scoring from it? I wish that every time Tottenham had a set piece that they were going to feel like they were going to score like Arsenal.
No team who's ever won the title has not been good at set pieces.
No,
have they?
And they are top of the table in goals scored from set pieces and goals scored from corners. So, look, we never see Nicolas Hover out of his technical area when they concede from a set piece. And so let's just put that one to bed for a second. It was very, very clever from Spurs. in the attacking set piece front, what they did, they know that Arsenal packed the areas, okay, both areas.
Yeah.
So what they did is they sent 2 players out to be the corner takers, to look like they were going to take a short one on a couple, and then they did take a short one, which means that then you drag a couple of defenders out with you, okay? And then Son, and I think it was Basuma, sit on the edge of the box for the one that comes back out. And there was one corner...
The one that Son
scores from, and nobody's picking him up. And I think on the corner before, it was Raheem Sterling who picked him up, but it was one of the Tottenham players dragged Sterling away, and then they score. So there's a defensive problem there for Arsenal. But again, Hover wasn't bouncing up and down on the edge of the technical area when Spurs scored, was he? But look, let's give them all the credit at the other end, because again, they score from a set piece. Spurs actually had a really good plan. Finally, after we talked about the set pieces in the preview show a couple of weeks ago, teams have started to put their best headers of the ball at the front post, which then blocks that front post corner. So now a lot more they're going to the back post. But obviously, how do you stop Gabriel? I'm not quite sure. I don't think
there was 2 within 3 yards.
And I don't think Dragazin did that much wrong. He was engaged with him. He had his shirt. He was nudging him. He didn't quite get his timing of his jump right. But look, it was so difficult. But the interesting thing was Tottenham left 2 up.
Yeah.
They left 2 upfield, and we'll show this as a grab as well, but they left 2 players as attackers out wide, which means, and by the way, I do this in boys football, but that's because we don't like defending corners. But then what that means is you'd think Arsenal would leave 3 back, and then you empty the penalty area a little bit. But they didn't, Arsenal. They were really brave. They left them one-on-one. Yeah. So I think it was Rice on Son, and then it was Timber or Lewis Skelly on Kulusevski. I think they rotated depending on which side of the field it was. But what that meant is that all of a sudden you thought, well, if the goalkeeper catches this and throws it out or kicks it, or Tottenham clear their line straight away, then it's 2v2 going the other way. And, 2 pacey, physical Tottenham players against 2 defenders, it could be something interesting. But I think that Arsenal gambled that there's no way that the Tottenham goalkeeper is going to catch any of these set pieces. Yeah. And so therefore, why bother? Because by the time Tottenham regain possession, we'll get somebody back, so it is 3v2. And most of the time, when Arsenal don't score, it goes out for a goal kick anyway, so that by the time it's reset. So it was a little bit of cat and mouse again, to use that phrase again, but Arsenal didn't concede their dominance at set pieces by allowing Ange's little trick of 2 up to derail it. They didn't go, oh, bugger, we've got to leave somebody back there.
They wanted to take the lead. It's like, we're dictating
exactly.
Here. Yeah.
This is our set piece. We're the best at it. We're staying as we are.
And very, very briefly, Dino, what did you see at the other end?
Tottenham did a good job in defensive positions in the main. In the attacking sense from set pieces, Arsenal are just so dominant, and they create that wall around the goalkeeper. The knockdown they scored from, but Arsenal were just the best in both boxes.
And finally, where does it leave both teams? 15 seconds on each you got.
Spurs, I'll do less on Spurs. Spurs need the players back from injury, and then I'm sure they'll climb the table, and the tactics are sound. They were beaten by a better team on the day. Arsenal are in the title race. They go to Anfield. They are a long way behind, 4 points, but Liverpool have a game in hand. But this brings the belief back. A game like this brings the belief back. And as we spoke about in previous tactics episodes, we go on about trusting a manager's tactics. And when you trust the tactics, you perform them and you carry them out. And that's what Arsenal did. And the better team won on the day.